Let's have fun, Mark.
All
Enjoy.
right. Wow. Now that I'm being recorded, I just became super nervous. So it doesn't affect my
Is this
performance.
is this your first podcast?
This is my first podcast as a participant. I've been a long time listener, of course.
I
Is,
hope
is this
first
your,
of the many to come.
maybe not, maybe not, hopefully not. Is this your first time hosting a podcast?
Yeah, of course.
Welcome, world. Welcome to Unboxing Stories. I'm your host, Tanmay K, and I'm thrilled to have you with us on this incredible journey through our professional spotlight series. This podcast is all about diving deep into the lives of professionals just like you, ambitious, hardworking, and aiming for the stars. Whether you're just starting out or well on your way, these stories are your stories.
Growing up in India and studying science, I was always surrounded by people from engineering and sciences. So the discussions were always revolving around the topics in those contexts, and I only knew this perspective of looking at life from a science and technology background. This changed when I moved to Europe several years ago and came across people studying and doing things which I didn't know one can do as a mainstream career: economics, politics, psychology, sports therapy, etc. Having conversations with them helped me gain different perspectives and open my mind to different fields in the world, which play a crucial role in moving the humanity and the world forward and to make it a better place. And that brings me to our today's guest. Although he's originally from America, he has a bit of Switzerland and a bit of Mexico in him. He grew up in Texas, studied economics, then followed an unconventional path for an American. He moved to Italy for studying politics and then decided to stay back in Italy and join the UN. And since then has been involved in amazing World Food Program contributing to their noble causes. Someone with great sense of humor, very sensible and mature in his approach to life, authentic, athletic, and just a good-looking dude. Mark Wischmeyer, welcome. How are you doing, Mark?
Wow, I'm shocked to hear the athletic and good-looking parts, though that is not something I'm known for in any way. But appreciate it, Todd. I appreciate it. Doing well,
No,
doing well.
I
How
think all of my friends when they see you, they're like, "Oh, that's your friend. Damn, he's good looking." So that's why I put this part in your intro.
This is a huge
But
self-esteem boost.
so much to unbox, and we are gonna peel every layer of your journey so far, and also see what lies ahead. Speaking of your ties with the US, your family background is truly a cultural melting pot, right? Mexico, Switzerland, and America. Can you take us back to your journey of your special heritage? It sounds like you have some fascinating stories to unwrap.
Sure, I think, yeah, maybe the older I get, the more I realize how interesting, I guess, my background, quote unquote, is. My grandfather, when he was about 20, 22 years old, he grew up in a really small village in Switzerland, where you live now, which now, of course, is like one of the most developed countries in the world. Back then, when he was growing up, it was, of course, quite had been quite destroyed by the war and was
Mm.
not in the best economic shape, as with the rest of Europe, of course. And so, looking for jobs, he actually found an opportunity to go to Mexico with the company that he was working for. And he got into the commodity trading business, specifically with cotton.
Oh, okay.
And so, he worked in Mexico for many, many years. Met my grandmother there, who was the secretary in the office. They dated for quite a while. He moved to Brazil, and they still have the letters of when they were writing to each other long distance.
Holy shit.
And they were long distance for many, many months. And then he came back to Mexico and got married to her. So he's a very faithful, dedicated man, which is crazy to think
Loyal.
about in today's world. I mean, that's absolutely wild. So yeah, that's where I guess, interesting side of the family comes from that, I guess, move to Mexico and moving and staying for the rest of your life. I mean, that's a big decision.
And then what about the US? So you were born in the US.
Mhm. Right. So then I was born in the US because my mother was born in Mexico and she was raised there as well until she was about 20. She moved with her entire family, including my grandfather, to the US to Dallas, where they eventually, well, my grandfather was transferred to the office there in Dallas to take on a different position, and so he took the opportunity, I guess, to move the whole family, and that's where she met my American dad, who was very stereotypical, normal American father.
So growing up in mixed culture household must have been quite an adventure. How did it influence your upbringing? Because I know since your childhood, you traveled a lot. You went to Mexico, you were in Switzerland, and household itself had mix of cultures. How did it affect you?
I think it made me a much more open-minded person. I mean, everyone that's grown up in a multicultural household, I think will probably say the same thing. I think for me, I had an unusual experience, let's say, because of my mother and my grandmother's willingness, and in fact, it was obligatory to speak Spanish and to teach us Spanish and to pass on that side of our culture. And in the US, it's not so common actually.
Right.
To have even families that have the full household is from the country in Latin America, often come to the US and are wanting to assimilate. And so I think I was very privileged on that side of they recognizing the fact that actually having Spanish and having this knowledge of this culture is super important. So I feel very, very blessed at this point. But as a kid growing up, I mean, you never think about that stuff. You think
Right.
just, God, my mom and my grandmother, what what different language are they speaking that none of my friends speak and none of my friends are interested in? So I actually felt like I felt a little bit unique, but in a bad way. I didn't think that it was a good thing growing up. I wasn't very proud of the fact that I spoke Spanish, the fact that I grew up in this multicultural household. I think in the US, unfortunately, there's not much room for that kind of stuff. I
Right.
think. And so that definitely impacted me, I think, as a kid. I mean, it impacts anyone. But then you grow up and you realize, actually, this is a blessing.
Yeah.
And not a day goes by where I don't thank my mom, grandma for passing down, of course, that part of our culture. But I think it also is like a very privileged perspective, as I was saying too.
And I think my observation is also that you have been very close to your mom and also your grandparents. And these days, I feel like this is something, especially with your grandparents, because families move away from the grandparents and the grandkids grow up without having grandparents around. And I feel like this is a big mess for people, for kids especially, who are growing up without grandparents being around, and for so many reasons. One of them you just mentioned, that some cultural values that they can teach you, or family values, and this is something so valuable that no one else can give that kind of wisdom to the grandkids of that age. So I can imagine how crucial the role that they played in your upbringing. It's wonderful to hear how you blended different cultures and became the product that you are today. Any siblings you have, brother and sister? How did their existence in your life shape you, and what do you think in general about having siblings in one's life? Are they
Interesting
necessary?
question. That's a great question, actually, Todd. Hadn't thought about this too much. Definitely made me, like I said, again, more open-minded, I think, as a kid, but for reasons that you aren't even aware of when you're a kid. I mean, there's just always someone there to hang out with and play with and to get along with, socialize with, and interact with. Even if those interactions are negative, I mean, you're learning how to interact with another human being. And from a very young age, that's super important, I think. So with my brother, I don't think we got along extraordinarily well as kids. And I think anyone can say this about their, younger brother or older brother. But now, I mean, we're very close friends and we have very profound conversations. And we listen to each other. We respect each other very much. And I think it was because of our upbringing where, of course, we learned how to deal with those like negative interactions that we were having in a much more mature way. And now we're both very mature and, I mean, grown adults and friends. So that's a very interesting development, I would say. And my sister and I have been quite close. And I think she played the role, big sister of two younger brothers that aren't getting along amazingly well. I think is definitely difficult. So she learned, I think, a lot of skills from this too. And interesting to think about how that has shaped, our personalities in this way. And looking back, I can see behaviors from my side as an older brother that my little brother would have perceived, in a negative way, and
Mm.
how that sort of interacted in our relationship. So it's just interesting how age sort of makes you reflect back and think on these things.
Yeah, they are your partners in crime in whatever you do, and they do really shape you.
Yeah, I think I was talking about this with another friend too, and they mentioned that growing up as an only child, for them, there's this stereotype of only child, only children being selfish and
Mm.
growing up selfishly. But he sort of completely disregarded that, and he didn't think at all that this was the case. It was more just the fact that he was exposed to kids his age in general from a
Yeah,
young age frequently was super helpful in his
but
upbringing.
that's a very good point, and I also think about it because I also have some friends who are the only child, and I think then even when you have a brother, there is an governing body above that, right? So that's your parents and
Yeah,
grandparents, and it really depends on them how they develop this dynamic between the siblings. So you think, oh, you're getting along with siblings and you have good relationship, but I think parents have a bigger role to play, that you unknowingly, or you don't know that they're playing this role, but they are kind of cultivating this relationship between the siblings and making sure that you get along and are in good terms for lifelong relationship.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And each parent, I mean, you almost have to be a therapist to be a good parent. I mean, it's learning all these types of skills, but parenting skills must be an absolute.
And as you get older, you realize it even more. It's like,
Yeah,
wow, how did my parents do this in the past?
exactly,
I'm not prepared for
exactly,
this.
exactly, exactly. Unfortunately.
So let's move on to your education and career. You have had an unconventional path for an American student. Did you plan your education and career so far? How did it come about the way it did? For example, moving to Italy was it a strategic move, or did it happen by chance? How did you end up in Italy not as a tourist?
It's another good question. I would say that it seems like looking back, like it was planned, but in reality, I think that plan I changed that plan every 6 months or so, I think. And it was always sort of in motion based on different things. But yeah, I'd say very classic American upbringing, at the beginning. Went to just the cheapest university that I could find in Texas, which is actually a fantastic university. And I'm very happy with my education there, of course. And I started out as an engineer, which is what you actually completed your studies in, and I was unable to complete it. So you have me have me beat there. For 2 years, I studied aerospace engineering, which is a huge mistake. Uh, and then I switched over to economics. So actually, a lot like what you were talking about at the beginning. I like science and math, but I was more motivated by other things, I think.
Mhm.
And so making that decision was difficult, but actually much, I would say very much worth it.
Uh-huh.
And then after this, I did some internships, many internships. I think my career has been defined by my internships that I've done, in some in Washington, D.C., in Buenos Aires, Argentina,
Mhm.
and in what was my other one? Oh, yeah. And when I moved to Italy, I did some internships here as well, both for WFP and another part of the UN. So that is really where I kind of formed my career path, was just kind of like trying and doing. Maybe yours is the same way.
Trying, yeah. No, that's serendipity at its best.
Yeah,
Trying
yeah,
and doing, I
exactly.
like it. So you stayed in Italy after your master's. So just to make it clear, you came here for part of the master's program that you were enrolled in. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the master's program, but despite the cultural differences, I mean, American culture and Italian culture, they're both of them are Western countries, but the cultures are so vastly different, right? Not a lot of Americans do what you're doing. I imagine most of them in your program as well went back to the US and started their careers over there. What made you stay, and do you ever think about returning to the US?
That's true. It's a good question. Moving to Italy was not really ever part of the plan, actually. In fact, when I applied to the university that I eventually went to, Johns Hopkins, they had the campus in Bologna. I
Mhm.
had applied to stay 2 years in Washington, D.C. because I thought that that's what would be best for my career. This is what I was going to do to get there. Despite it would be interesting, I think it would have been interesting to go for, 8 or 9 months in Italy. And then I was sort of thinking on my life and reflecting on my decision, and I realized, well, spending, the first year in Italy, it's not going to limit me career-wise too much. I can always make that ground back up when I move back to Washington, D.C., which I never did. So I think it was just slowly but surely changing these plans. And it was nice to be flexible in my plan.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I think when I came to Italy, I had no idea. And what you mentioned is super true about the differences, but it's also true in the sense that they're very similar. And I think the best parts of American culture are also emulated in Italian culture too. Mostly, I mean, and you've experienced this too. Let me know if you think this is true. There's a lot of warmth in Italian culture and a lot
Right.
of welcoming, and the stereotype I think is actually quite real.
Mhm.
I think I have very, very close friendships here. I mean, include you were included in this
Thank
that
you.
I maybe would Yeah, sure. that I maybe wouldn't have had there in the US,
Mm.
which is a big reason of why I stayed. I think for sure if I were to have moved back, possibly my career would have taken different turns and maybe even
Right.
better turns. But I realized I thought about the life that I wanted to be living, and I think my values align much more with life. Maybe not necessarily Italy, but Europe in general.
Right.
And the lifestyle, I think, as well is much more relaxed. And this is something I think I very much appreciate.
What's your favorite part about living in Italy?
Ooh, that's another good question. The friendships, I have to say. It's the friendships.
Mm.
Yeah. I yeah, I think being luckily I can speak the language, and that's again thanks to my mom helping me in learning Spanish, and then that being so similar to Italian. I mean, it's
Mm.
one
Yeah.
one quick step. And so that is super helpful. And I have to say, Italians are just super welcoming. And once you're their friend for for life, I think. And this really is different from American culture, where like a big city like New York, you're going to meet people all the time, but how many
Yeah.
close, good friends are you going to have that you can rely on? And I'm just stereotyping here, of course, but I think in Italy it's the exact opposite. You can meet maybe relatively fewer people than you would if you were going to go to the US, but those meetings and connections are going to be quite profound,
Mm.
which is great. I think the friendships, and I mean, everywhere you go, it's really beautiful. That is
And food, right? Cherry on the top is the food.
absolutely, yeah. And I'm a big fan of cooking, as are you. Well, how do you say that?
I
But yeah, so
we did
but
this cooking course together. I still remember. That was so much fun.
incredible,
Learning
incredible.
tortellini in Bologna. Italy does have its charm, and it's an amazing place to stay. And as you said, knowing the language definitely helps to make your life easier and helps you to integrate into the society which is already welcoming. So with the language, you are even more welcome into the society, and yeah, it's just wonderful life over there. Working for the UN sounds like an incredible experience. I mean, a lot of people have who study economics and politics, I'm sure, have dream of working for the UN. What's your role there, and how has been the experience so far?
So I'll talk about my role first, probably. I've had various roles, I guess, over the past few years. I started my, let's say, UN career, if I can call it that, as an intern, the classic way to, to start, I would say. I interned during COVID, so I was working in Bologna while I was studying part-time for a part of UNDP, which is called the UN Capital Development Fund.
Mm,
And they were based in New York. So I was working New York hours from Bologna while studying as well, which is quite intense. But given that it was
nice.
remote, I actually feel really lucky because I mean that opportunity would have never been possible if it wasn't for COVID and remote work being so, available. After that, the summer between my first and second years of my master's program, I interned for the Brussels office of that same UN agency,
Mhm.
doing very similar things as well, including mostly, so it's a partnerships role, which means fundraising essentially. So I was doing a lot of donor outreach, presentations, and helping, the upper level staff that are going to these various meetings with people. So very interesting to get to know how the UN is funded, and how that side of the operation
Mhm.
works. And it was a nice way to get to know various UN agencies as well. So there's so many, and so I was having to do a lot of research into different ones to get to know their mandates and what they do. And that's where I found as well WFP, where I'm working now. So I interned there as well during and after my master's. So my third UN internship after it's all said and done.
WFP is World Food Program, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, sorry for the listeners. Yeah, for the World
Or a
Food Program,
listener. I actually don't know how many
or maybe
people
one.
listen.
And essentially, my role is it's become much different, but it's still similar in some ways. Working as a program and policy officer,
Mhm.
and for the humanitarian policy team at
Wow.
WFP. And essentially, what that means is, so my specific role is writing briefs and preparing upper level staff for their meetings.
Wow.
Whether it's a meeting with a donor government, a partner, or what have you, that is generally going to fall on me to sort of prepare them before they go into the meeting, because these people's schedules are packed to the brim. So they need to be briefed a bit beforehand. And so I'm basically writing very clear, reports on what we're trying to achieve in many of these different meetings and what the purpose is. And that's been a lot of fun, and it's been very interesting as well, I have to say, because I'm learning a lot about how this sort of sector works.
That's very impressive. I've always been curious, and I'm sure a lot of people who aspire to work for the UN one day are also curious about this. So everyone studies, I mean, who decides to study politics and economics, most of them would want to have this kind of career that you have, and you have navigated yourself quite well through these different internships. What I'm interested in, what kind of skills do they look for in the UN? So how did you prepare yourself to get into these roles, and what kind of mindset and curriculum one needs to have to do this job?
Yeah, I think there's no one set package. I think it's the UN is so big that they do so many different things that any type of profile, in my opinion, is helpful and worthwhile to either apply or for the UN to take a look at. I mean,
Mhm.
I where I work, we work with people that specialize in nutrition that have PhDs
Wow.
in one field, and then are hired by the UN sort of later in their career. And we have engineers that are building infrastructure all across the world where it's most needed. We have, pilots that are flying planes to get humanitarian aid where it needs to go, truck drivers, so any type of profile is really accepted. At least I'm talking about the WFP side of things
Right.
here, but overall across the UN system, I think there's so many different types of jobs that are available and that anyone can do, that it really isn't just one sort of skill or background. But I will say the one thing for me that has stuck out, that has helped me to advance, if I've even advanced, I haven't advanced too much, but to advance a bit, has been writing. I think I'm a good writer and it comes naturally to me. And this is
Mm.
something really important because working in such an international environment with many different people speaking, I'm writing mostly in English, but of course at the UN, people are speaking any any UN language. So when I'm writing in English, many people are not native English speakers,
Right.
and so they speak very, very well. But sometimes the writing can be a bit of a challenge, I think. And I
Mhm.
don't mean that they're talented, I just mean in the way they express their ideas. It's not very clear and it's not very precise. And I'm more of like a direct, precise writer. And it's
Mm.
very easy for people to understand if they're not a natural, not a mother tongue in English, let's say. That is my number one contribution, let's say.
How did you develop the skill of writing?
Being a nerd, I was a huge nerd when I was a kid, and I read constantly every day. I had no friends, and I only read books. I swear that's that's exactly how. I really think that's what happened because I mean, I've never really had like a big passion for it, for
Hmm.
writing. But when I was a kid, I read just so many different books. Anything I get my hands on, my mom still makes fun of me to this day.
Wow.
Um, but definitely, I mean, if there are no children reading this or listening to this, there's plenty of courses out there that you can take to develop it. I
Mm.
mean, I think guess it was honed in many years of, in grad school you write a lot, in
Right.
university you write all the time. I guess, and maybe not in the Italian system too, because the Italian education system, it seems to be a lot of oral exams. But I mean, you can tell me from your perspective in India too. But in the US and in the US system, writing is very strongly emphasized, I think.
It's interesting in today's age. I would love to hear your take on the AI. So you think what you're doing can be done by AI? Is it something that you think
Definitely,
about?
yes. I think I'm very replaceable, to be honest, yes. But I mean, in its current state, no,
Mm,
like not nearly as quality as if a human
right.
had written it. It's impressive the fact that they can gather all these data points and information and make a coherent, document, but it's nowhere near the point
Mhm.
where it's going to take.
But you think it might be sometime in future that this might be possible?
It's possible. I think it's definitely possible. I think right now, there's always going to be pros and cons probably to
Mm,
that. I think there's things that I will know about a meeting or an event that an AI just won't and will never be able to. But you never know how the technology is going to develop and
yeah,
in the next few
yeah,
years. I mean, in 1990, we didn't think that people would be carrying around, these computers that we have in our pockets that are
right.
ruining your brains. So, you never know what's going to happen in the future, I think. What do you think?
I think some redundant tasks would definitely be replaced by AI, like scheduling of the meetings, or like even
Mm,
Microsoft Teams. It already has this integrated AI which reminds you, oh, you have meeting in 5 minutes, or would you like to take notes or transcribe some meetings? So I think these sort of things would be sooner or later be used everywhere. But
mm,
the human aspect, I mean, you're writing reports and you're reading something, you're gathering the knowledge through different sources, and not just reading things on the internet, because I'm sure you talk to people, you do your advanced research, and that's something thing AI will not be able to do, right? Because it's probably you can create your report and get it polished by AI, but you'll have to create your own report. That's what I think.
right, right. And I think it can be a great tool when you're looking maybe to start from scratch about a topic that you don't really know much
Right.
about. It's really easy to get up to speed with AI and do that sort of research. But I think the
Yeah.
strategic edge in a lot of these types of meetings that we are having, it will be really difficult for AI to come
Mm,
up with that. But I mean, you never know. I think it's possible. It's
yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
You can definitely say you can track trends really well. So you can say you met with this donor government last year, and this is what you talked about, and then it can help you write the brief
Right.
for the next meeting or something like that for sure.
You're not just a good looking guy, right? You're a smart guy as well. So I'm sure with time you're gonna be equipping yourself to with different skill sets that AI can't compete with. I'm 100% sure.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope
with,
to be retired in 10 years as well. But we'll see.
with your efforts in World Food Program, and World Food Program is quite big and has been involved in a lot of places, like a lot of places where there are wars, where there is scarcity of food, and doing really lot of good work. Do you ever think of physically going to these places and contributing?
No, 100%. I will go definitely. It's an expectation of a lot of our staff
Mm,
to go, and everyone's talking about where they want to go next and what they want to do next, which I think is really great. It contributes to a culture of everyone wanting to lend a helping hand when the time comes. So definitely, if and that's the great part about WFP is they have so much reach and
mm,
things happen quick when they need to happen quick. Like I could be emailed tomorrow and asked to go, and
mm.
I'd be on a plane in 48 hours. So it just
Wow.
depends on the
Wow.
situation and the need, but definitely it's in the plans for sure. I think that's where you learn the most and contribute the
Mm.
most. That's where WFP, of course, does its best work.
what do you hope the world would look like in 10 years or 10 to 15 years from now with all the efforts that WFP is doing?
That's an interesting one. I think the WFP perspective is we would like to not exist. That's what, we always say. And
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It doesn't, it seems very far from happening, unfortunately. And it's going to be difficult for WFP to not exist, I think. There's always going to be emergencies going on all over the world, whether it's conflict, and there's a lot of conflict right now, unfortunately, and climate change is going to be picking up,
Right.
exacerbating a lot of these different problems,
Mm.
whether it's over the long term or the short term. And so, unfortunately, I see very limited opportunities in the future for WP to not exist. I hope, but it would be great. I mean, I would love for the whole world to be able to, I don't know, have as much food as they need, but it's just not the reality that we live in right now.
Hmm. Unfortunate for the world, but fortunate for the people who are in need. So I guess some noble cause there. What about you personally? What's your vision, or looking ahead, what are you most excited about personally?
I'm looking forward, and I think this kind of contradicts what I just said, but looking forward very much to being able to have like stable life in a city that I enjoy. I think
Mm.
moving around so much in my career, it's been hard to find, community in some of the places that, if you're moving around this often, it's difficult to really,
Right.
grow roots in a new city. And now that I've been in Rome for several years, it's definitely happening. And so that's something I'm really looking forward to personally, I think.
Wow.
Growing together with, friends and the community that I have here will be
Wow.
great. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I think with my career, I'll be called to do more elsewhere. So
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to balancing both, I think.
And and professionally, where do you see yourself in next 5 to 10 years? Have you thought about it?
I've never, I haven't thought about I have the luxury of not having to think about it right now because I mean, doing what I'm doing now has been my goal for the last like 5 to 10 years, I guess, let's say.
Mm.
Even from when I was a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, I was thinking of joining the UN, and first when I was reading about it and
Wow.
seeing what it would take to get there, and now that I'm here, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I'm actually doing this, to be honest. And now that
Wow.
I'm here, I'm like, I have no idea what to do next.
Yeah.
So professionally, I
Living
think,
living in the moment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, a little bit about that, yeah. And just,
Mm.
I think I've given up trying to plan. I
Mm.
used to always plan so much, and then I realized that planning made me less flexible to see opportunities that would come up in the future that would make me, better, just because I didn't go with the plan that I had in my mind. So I think I'm learning to sort of take it more alla mano, as the Italians say,
Uh-huh.
and try to be more, flexible with when things like that come up. Yeah,
That's
but it's
a
a
that's an
good interview.
interesting approach. Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. I
If
like.
this was a job interview, I would give you a different answer.
No, I really like what you said. Planning can limit your opportunities that you might possibly have. So yeah, I should think about it as well.
What
uh,
about your strategy been different?
the whole journey has until now, and it's still ongoing journey to find out what I would really love to do, what my really passion is. And I think I'm still kind of exploring. So everything that I've done in my life, I always felt like this is not the destination. Like I'm still figuring out what I would love to do. And these are the
Mhm,
tools that I'm using to figure it out. So
mhm,
doing the PhD or even the job that I have or the one that I had before, it was immensely useful, but I knew that I need to understand through this job what I really need to do. It's always been a journey. So doing this podcast is also part of that journey. I always wanted to do that. So I thought, yeah, there's only one way to find out by doing
mhm.
it. Any influential figures that have inspired you, or still any people that you look up to?
This is a good one. Definitely my mom.
Hmm.
I've got a lot of inspiration from her. My mom and grandfather. I mean,
Mm.
grandmother too, of course, but I think especially my grandfather. My mom, I think, and this doesn't have much to do with career, unfortunately. But personally, my mom has been a big inspiration for me and how selfless she is with so many people, and how, I mean, just fantastic of a parent she was, and she definitely has inspired me quite a bit in my life. And I'm only able to do the things that I want to do in life and that I like to do, which is a privilege in itself, just because of her and the hard work that she's put in her life, and doing things, maybe sacrificing things that she would have liked to do, but didn't, because she's raising a kid, three kids.
Mm.
So I owe the world of gratitude to my mom for that.
Wow.
And I think my grandmother helped me to understand what it's like to move and inspire me, I think, to what it's like to live in another country, move in another country, and what different cultures are like, what different languages are like. Getting that sort of exposure as a young kid changes, really, really physically changes you, I think, especially growing up in the US in a
Mhm.
relatively conservative state. I'll say extremely conservative state, where there's not much in terms of diversity, I think, there, especially when you compare it to a place like Europe where people are speaking
Mm.
different languages and are constantly exposed to different types of people. Texas is just such a big place that it's hard to come across anyone from somewhere different than you. And so having someone like my grandfather, who was Swiss, speaks perfect Spanish, speaks German, all these different languages, has lived and worked across the world as a grandfather, is was super influential to me
Wow.
and super, really, really useful in terms of me getting inspiration from someone, because never felt like I fit in much when I was in Texas,
Mhm.
um, for a variety of reasons. But I think having that sort of family background helped me to feel, a part of something bigger. And when I moved out away, I was always felt very supported in that decision. I think
Mm.
it's difficult when you come from a family that's maybe quite conservative. They aren't so willing to let you go, which makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So not having to deal with, that side of things, and having a complex family, has been really, really nice.
It's a luxury to have, and it's amazing how having such role models within your own family can shape your path and have immense influence on you. You talked about having lots and lots of failures. What kind of failures you had, and what lessons did they teach you?
So many failures. I can talk about some, like maybe a few. I mean, I consider my decision to study engineering to be kind of a bit of a failure. And the fact
Mhm.
that I studied it for 2 years and was getting pretty poor grades, for such a long time, was a failure on my end. And I think I failed, and looking back now, I can say this. I didn't fail academically. I don't think I was, not academically capable. I think it was just something I didn't like.
Mhm.
I was forcing myself to study something I didn't like because I thought it would be cool, and I thought that I would make a good living because of it. I didn't want to make, like crazy amounts of money. I just wanted to have like a stable life.
Right.
And from when I was a kid, people would tell me that being an engineer was, or having a really stable life, it's the best way. So
Mhm.
I didn't really question that until I figured out that I don't like engineering. And it's super important. I mean, of course, I'm not criticizing in any way, that it just really wasn't for me. And so I remember deciding to move to economics was like the biggest weight was just lifted off of my shoulders. And in that sense, I guess it didn't feel too much like a failure, although I had just put in 2 years of studies into something that then wouldn't be useful. So from that perspective, I guess a waste of time, maybe, but I learned a lot. I learned how to listen to myself and listen to my feelings about what's in front of me, and how to sort of change my own situation to make it better. Because no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, your situation can always change. I mean, you're completely in charge of yourself and your life. So I think that was a big, failure that I had to go through to learn.
I always look at failures in a way that failure is a feedback. So
Yeah,
whatever you fail at, it's a feedback that you're receiving from that failure, and that feedback can be used as knowledge to overcome the next hurdle that you might have, right? So failure is feedback, feedback is knowledge, and knowledge is power. that's
exactly.
that's yeah. So I think failing is amazing, and everyone should fail at everything that they do, so that they can become a better version of themselves. In a way, like, you get to know yourself better. If you had to give advice to 18-year-old Mark, what would it be?
18-year-old me. What was I even doing back then? My God. God knows. I would say, what is my advice? I would just say be less afraid, probably. I think I was a really scared teenager, to be honest. Those years were quite difficult. Um, and I think that, I don't know, I just lived in a more scared way, scared to fail, scared to, even to like socialize. I think this is the period that I was talking about when I was just reading books all the time. I wish that I had lived less scared. Yeah, that would have been
Mhm.
good advice to give myself. But I mean, these are things you learn with failure and you learn
Right.
with age. So I don't like knock myself for not having done this, but I wish that I had lived with more courage, probably. Yeah.
That's
You?
an excellent advice.
You?
What advice I would give to 18-year-old Mark?
Oh yeah, or that or yourself.
And advice to myself when I was 18 years old, I would tell myself that you are no less than the guy sitting beside you.
Mm,
So be more confident in who you are and just be more confident.
that's what I would also add that to my list of advice.
The podcast is called Professional Spotlight Series, and this is something that I ask everyone. If you had to put three spotlights on your journey so far, one in the past, one in the present, and one that you would like to see in future, kind of pivotal moments of your life, what would those be?
Nice question, Tom. Wow. That's a deep one. Three spotlights on my professional career. Interesting. I have to spotlight on the second failure that I was going to talk about for my past. I guess looking back, yeah, I still consider it quite a bit of a failure. When I was interning for WFP and at the same time going to graduate school, I thought it'd be much easier to get a job after I'd graduated than I could have ever possibly imagined that it would be. It was super difficult for me to get a full-time job. And even outside of WFP, outside of the UN, I wasn't looking just for those types of positions. I was looking for anything. I was quite desperate at this point. And I was still interning, making really low, intern salaries and just trying to survive. And I was at the same time, doing all these job applications, which, as you know, take days and days and days to complete, and then going through the interview process, which takes a lot of time and preparation and separate rounds of interviews, which is super draining. And I mean, you have to be so vulnerable when you're in a job interview. I think it's super
Mm.
difficult to be so vulnerable for so many different people and Zoom meetings and different like analysis tests and personality tests and all these different things. And I remember you helping me a lot actually with all these different types of processes. I mean, just dealing with rejection. I was rejected all the time last year, 2 years ago. And I think the final count was like 28 job interviews,
Wow.
which is a lot in the period of like 4 months,
Oh my God.
which was just, yeah, such a brutal way to go. I mean, on so much more to your life.
Is there something that you would have done differently in this 28 job interviews that you did?
I keep asking myself that, and I don't think so. I think I actually did well. It was just bad luck in a lot of ways because they had someone that was more qualified, which is totally
Uh-huh.
fair. Maybe they were looking for someone more. I rejected a couple interviews as well, just because it
Uh-huh.
seemed like a little bit too, entry level than what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I mean, the fact that I was just honest about with each of these job interviews, there were several questions that I didn't even try to make up a response. I just was like, I have no idea. You tell me. And I remember some of those worked out, and I ended up passing to the next stage, but never, beyond that. But I appreciate. I mean, I was much less nervous at going into job interviews, and performed much better when I just knew I was going to present myself in the way that I am, and not in the way that you know people want me to be, not
Right, right, right.
the perfect way that this job or this company wants. That was super helpful.
I know someone which is kind of crazy. What he does is he has a perfect job, but once in a while he just goes and applies to jobs just to see if he's still
Marketable.
able to get a job outside if he decides ever to switch. So he just
Interesting.
randomly applies to positions, gives interview, does everything until the end, and then goes up. Actually, I'm happy with my current job. But he
Interesting.
just goes
Interesting.
through this recruiting process and
Wow. That's fascinating.
the-
That's a good advice, actually. I wonder
yeah.
what that would be like.
And I guess with that, you have, he said, with this attitude that he has, where he has nothing to lose because he already has a job which he likes. He's just kind of, he has fearless approach. And more often than not, he gets the offer and which he
Right.
has to reject.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a mindset change, I think, but it's really
Mm,
important. Yeah. Spotlight on the present. I think I probably let me just spotlight. I'm trying to think outside the box more
mm,
in my role. I think once in any job,
mm,
if you do the same thing daily, it can get really mundane.
mm,
And I think something that I want to take more into now that I've, done a year in the same position, I can go this year and sort of create a bit more and get involved in more things. And I'm trying to increase, well, we'll see if this works out, but I'm trying to work more with the private sector in terms of partnering with different companies for WFP, getting both not just funding, but also, know-how and expertise that's available in the private sector that exists. And through all these different ESG and social impact strategies, these companies have priorities that align very much with ours. And so I think this sort of idea has brought me to think of different ways of how to establish different partnerships with companies. Some of these companies are enormous. I mean, they have massive amounts of resources that they're willing to and able to spend on social impact projects that make a big difference in the world. And so I think I'm trying to develop some skills and talk to the right people that are already doing this type of thing, both at WFP and across the UN, to see what can happen. Because I think we're really at a inflection point. I think in terms of it can either get much much worse or it can get better. I mean, and I'm an optimist, and I think that it's going to get better. But I want to be at least part of thinking outside the box thinking is what we need right now. And I think that I would like to at least challenge myself to do what I can in my role and in my part to move things forward.
interesting. Interesting. And future, if you have to put spotlight on yourself in the future.
I am very happy in my life and career right now. So I would say looking forward to the next, not even the next phase, just this is so far in the future that it's not even relevant. But retirement to me is
Ah.
going to be fantastic. But I think, I don't know, retiring well and be able to provide for your family. And
Mhm.
I've always had this dream of like running a Airbnb, not an Airbnb, what's it called? Agriturismo here in
Mm.
Italy, where I'm farming and
Wow.
cooking all the different type of like natural native ingredients and a family there and just, I don't know. I think that sort of life that really sort of appeals to me.
I can
Would love-
imagine you doing that. We can have
You think
another
so?
episode when you do that.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I can
Wonderful.
talk about my failures and bringing up my farm.
This this has been really, really terrible. You and me both are gonna regret doing this.
Me too. Me too.
I don't know why you signed up for this. No, but I really enjoyed it. This was really fantastic, and thanks a lot for taking your time and being so gracious with it. This was cherry on the top for my start of the week. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tommy. These questions have been fantastic, and it made me think and reflect on a lot of different things. So much appreciated. I think it's going to be a very successful podcast for sure. Maybe not this episode so much, but the podcast in general will be fantastic.
Thanks a lot for supporting my little project.
Of course, Todd. Of course. Anything.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Unboxing Stories Professional Spotlight Series. I hope you found today's discussion as inspiring and insightful as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback keeps our passion alive and helps us reach more incredible listeners like you. Thanks for listening. I'm Tanmay K, and I look forward to having you join us again for our next episode, where we will feature another fascinating professional. Until then, keep striving, keep thriving, and keep unboxing your story. Until then, goodbye.